The story of the Second World War is not only a record of battles and dates, but a human story of fear and courage, loss and resolve, and of a nation that learned how deeply the world is connected. For the United States, World War II was the moment when distance no longer meant safety, and when ordinary citizens were asked to carry an extraordinary burden. A world on the brink. In the years after World War I, the world hoped for peace but struggled with economic collapse and political anger. Across Europe and Asia, authoritarian regimes promised strength and pride. In Germany, Adolf Hitler rose to power, rebuilding the military and seeking territorial expansion. In Asia, Japan expanded aggressively, believing it needed land and resources to survive. The United States watched from afar. Many Americans believed the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans were shields that could protect them from another foreign war. Memories of World War I were still painful. The country focused on recovery from the Great Depression, and isolationism shaped public opinion. Pearl Harbor, the day everything changed. On the quiet Sunday morning of December 7, 1941, that sense of distance vanished. Japanese planes attacked the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Ships burned, airplanes were destroyed, and more than 2,400 Americans were killed. For the American people, Pearl Harbor was more than a military strike. It was a shock to the national identity. The next day, President Franklin D. Roosevelt called it a date which will live in infamy, and Congress declared war. The United States was no longer watching history, it was inside it. America mobilizes. Factories that once made cars now produced tanks, planes, and ships. Women entered the workforce in massive numbers, symbolized by Rosie the Riveter. Farmers increased production to feed both civilians and soldiers overseas. Children collected scrap metal, and families planted victory gardens. Millions of young men were drafted or volunteered. They left farms, cities, and small towns, often traveling farther from home than ever before. Training camps transformed civilians into soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines. The war effort became a shared national mission. The war in Europe. In Europe, American forces joined British and other Allied troops to fight Nazi Germany. The battles were brutal. Soldiers landed on the beaches of Normandy on D-Day, June 6, 1944, facing heavy fire to establish a foothold in occupied France. From there, the Allies pushed through towns and countryside, discovering the horrors of concentration camps, clear evidence of genocide and crimes against humanity. For many American soldiers, the war became not just about victory, but about stopping evil itself. The Pacific War. While Europe burned, the Pacific War was equally fierce. American forces fought island by island against Japan. Places like Guadalcanal, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa became symbols of intense combat. The Pacific War showed Americans a different kind of conflict: jungle fighting, naval battles, and a determined enemy unwilling to surrender. Casualties were high, and the emotional toll was heavy on both soldiers and families back home. The home front sacrifice. At home, Americans lived with rationing, war bonds, and constant news from overseas. Telegrams delivered the worst kind of messages. Communities gathered around radios and newspapers, following the war's progress together. Japanese Americans faced internment, a dark chapter in U.S. history, driven by fear rather than evidence. It was a reminder that even democracies can fail their own ideals during times of crisis. The war ends. In Europe, Germany surrendered in May 1945. Americans celebrated Victory in Europe Day, But the war was not yet over. In August, after years of bloody fighting, the United States used atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Japan surrendered soon after, ending World War II. The victory came at an enormous cost, more than 400,000 American lives lost and tens of millions worldwide. A new role for America. When the war ended, the United States emerged as a global leader. The conflict reshaped its economy, its military, and its sense of responsibility to the world. Institutions like the United Nations were formed to prevent future wars, and America took a central role in rebuilding Europe and Japan. World War II taught Americans that isolation was no longer possible. Freedom, security, and peace required engagement, sacrifice, and vigilance. Why the story still matters. For an American audience today, World War II is more than history. It is a reminder of what unity can achieve, of the cost of hatred and unchecked power, and of the responsibility that comes with strength. The war was fought by ordinary people placed in extraordinary circumstances. Their choices shaped the modern world, and their story continues to define what America believes it stands for. This is not just the story of a war. It is the story of America stepping onto the world stage and discovering the price and the promise of global responsibility.
When the fighting stopped, the world did not return to normal. Silence followed the explosions, but it was not peace, it was exhaustion. Cities lay in ruins, families were broken, and nations faced a single question: what now? Coming home changed. For American soldiers, coming home was joyful and difficult at the same time. They returned as heroes, but many carried invisible wounds. Nightmares, guilt, and memories of combat followed them back to quiet neighborhoods and familiar streets. The U.S. government passed the GI Bill, offering education, housing loans, and job training. It reshaped the American middle class. Colleges filled with veterans. Suburbs expanded. The American dream grew, but it was not equally shared by all. A divided world emerges. For the wartime alliance between the United States and the Soviet Union quickly faded. Trust collapsed, ideologies clashed. Democracy and capitalism faced off against communism and state control. The Cold War had begun, not with bullets, but with fear, suspicion, and nuclear weapons. America now lived with the reality that another global war could begin at any moment, and this time it could end civilization itself. America as a global power. Before World War II, the United States often avoided deep involvement overseas. After it, that was no longer possible. American troops stayed in Europe and Asia. Military bases spread across the globe. The U.S. helped rebuild Western Europe through economic aid, believing stability would prevent future wars. This marked a turning point. America was no longer just a nation, it was a global leader. Moral victories and moral failures. The Holocaust revealed what happens when hatred is allowed to grow unchecked. The atomic bomb revealed how powerful and dangerous human invention could be. For Americans, these lessons reshaped national thinking. War was no longer distant or abstract, it was personal. It could reach any city, any family, any generation. Why Part 2 matters today. World War II did not truly end in 1945. Its consequences still shape global politics, military strategy, and American identity. The alliances formed, the fears created, and the responsibilities accepted continue to influence decisions today. For the United States, the war answered one question clearly: what happens in the world will always matter at home.